Violet Quill stood in the dust outside the Desert Mercy boarding house, with her doctor's bag clutched to her chest, while half the town whispered that a trembling woman had no business touching a dying man. The stage driver had thrown her trunk down like refuse. Her promised position was gone, and the banker's clerk laughed when her hands shook too badly to sign for a room. Then Barton Keller rode in from the south with a ranch hand bleeding in his saddle and a face carved hard by sun, loss, and pride. He looked at Violet like a broken tool until she stepped forward, afraid and pale, and said she could save him. "Before we open the door to this dusty town, tell me your country in the comments. Subscribe if you love Western romances about public shame, unexpected rescue, and hearts that finally come home." The town of Mercy Flats had been built, where the desert finally grew tired of being empty. A crooked street ran between a general store, a livery, a saloon with sun-bleached doors, a church no wider than a wagon shed, and a bank with polished windows that made it look richer than the town around it. Everything else was dust, mesquite, wind, and miles of yellow land rolling away toward low red hills. Violet Quill had arrived there with a letter of employment, a medical bag, 2 dresses folded into a battered trunk, and the kind of hope a woman carried when she had nothing left but her own hands. By noon, all of it had begun to fall apart. The man who had promised her a room at the boarding house claimed he had never seen her letter. Mrs. Biddle, who ran the place with a mouth sharp enough to cut leather, read Violet's name aloud as if it were a charge. "Dr. Violet Quill," she said, looking at the townspeople gathered by the porch. "A lady doctor. Mercy Flats surely has seen the end of days." A few men laughed. A woman holding a parasol lifted her chin and looked Violet from bonnet to boots. Violet tightened her fingers around the handle of her bag. Her hands trembled. They had trembled since the accident 3 years before, when the wagon overturned near the Arkansas River, and her father died with her name on his lips. The tremor came when she was hungry, or frightened, or stared at too long. It did not come when flesh was torn, and a life had to be held in place. But Mercy Flats did not know that. They saw only the shaking. "I was hired by Dr. Linus Harrow," Violet said. "He wrote that the town needed an assistant physician." Mrs. Biddle gave a small, ugly smile. "Dr. Harrow left for Tucson 2 weeks ago. Said a certain young woman might come claiming promises. Said not to trust her." The words landed hard enough that Violet nearly stepped back. "Not to trust me. That is what he said." Violet felt heat rising in her face. She had worked beside Harrow for 6 months in Santa Fe, keeping his accounts, setting bones, sewing wounds, riding out in rain when he would not leave his supper. He had praised her skill, then borrowed money from her, then vanished with the ledger and half the medicines. His last letter had said Mercy Flats wanted her. She had believed it because she needed to believe something. "I have his letter," she said. The banker's clerk, a narrow young man named Otto Meeks, snatched the paper before she could stop him. He read the first line, frowned, then held it up to the light. "Could be forged." "It is not forged." "Easy to say." Otto looked at her trembling hand. "Harder to prove when you cannot even hold still." The laughter this time was quieter, but worse. Violet reached for the letter, but Otto lifted it just beyond her grasp. Her stomach twisted. She had eaten nothing since dawn, and before that, only a heel of bread. Her pride kept her standing. Her body wanted the shade. "Give that back," she said. Otto looked toward the bank, where Mr. Ezra Vale stood in his doorway, watching with a silver-headed cane in his hand. Vale was the sort of man who did not need to raise his voice, because others did it for him. He nodded once, barely, and Otto folded the letter. "Mr. Vale says the town has enough trouble without strange women claiming titles they did not earn." "I earned mine," Violet said. "My father was a physician. I trained under him from the time I could read labels on bottles. I passed examinations in St. Louis. A certificate can be bought." Mrs. Biddle said. "So can a lie." Violet answered. That silenced them for a breath. Then a horse came hard down the street. Dust rose ahead of it, thick and gold in the afternoon glare. The rider bent low, one arm around a man, slumped over the saddle before him. Blood streaked the horse's shoulder. Men stepped into the street. Someone shouted for water. Someone else called for Dr. Harrow. Then remembered too late that Harrow was gone. The horse stopped in front of the boarding house with a hard skid. The rider swung down. He was tall, lean from labor rather than hunger, with a hat pulled low over eyes, the color of storm clouds. His shirt was sweat dark at the chest. His face had the sunburned hardness of a man who had spent years refusing comfort. "Where is the doctor?" he demanded. Nobody answered. The wounded man groaned. He was older, with a gray beard and a shirt soaked red along his ribs. Violet took one step forward before fear could stop her. "I'm a doctor," she said. The rider turned and looked at her. That was Violet's first clear sight of Barton Keller. She did not know his name yet, but she felt the force of him. Not kindness, not warmth, force. His jaw was tight, and the grief in him had gone old and dry, like a creek bed that remembered water but would not admit it. "You," he said. The word held every doubt the town had already thrown at her. Violet swallowed. Yes. His eyes dropped to her hands. They were shaking. A man near the hitching rail muttered, "Barton, don't let her cut on Soul. She was just exposed as a fraud." Barton Keller looked from Violet to the wounded man and back again. The wounded man's breathing hitched wetly. "What happened?" Violet asked. "Gored by a steer." Barton said. "Horn went in under the ribs." "How long ago?" "An hour, might be more." "Get him inside." Mrs. Biddle blocked the doorway. "Not in my parlor." Violet turned on her. "Then he can bleed to death on your steps, and you might explain that to God." The porch went silent. Barton looked at Violet again, and something shifted in his face. Not trust, not yet, but decision. "Move," he told Mrs. Biddle. She moved. They carried Soul into the boarding house dining room and laid him on the long table. Violet forgot the porch, the letter, the laughter. Her world narrowed to breath, blood, pulse, pressure. She set her bag down and opened it. Her hands trembled while she unfolded her instruments. Then she touched Soul's wound, and the trembling stopped. Barton noticed. She saw him notice. "Boil water," she said. "Clean cloth. Whiskey if you have it. Lamp closer. You, Mr. Keller, hold him still. You know my name. Everyone does now. Hold him." He obeyed. That was the first time Barton Keller did what Violet Quill told him. The horn had torn deep, but not as deep as it might have. She cleaned the wound while Saul cursed weakly. She found the bleeding vessel, tied it off with steady fingers, stitched muscle and skin, and packed the injury with carbolic-soaked gauze from her bag. Sweat ran down her neck. More than once the room tilted from hunger, but she did not stop. When it was done, Saul breathed easier. Violet straightened slowly. Her hands began to tremble again, harder now that the danger had passed. Barton stared at her, as if he had been shown a locked door in a wall he thought was solid. "He might live," Violet said. "If fever does not take him. He needs clean bedding, broth, and watching." Barton removed his hat. "You saved him. I treated him. God decides the rest." Otto Meeks stood in the doorway, still holding her letter. "Could be luck." Barton turned his head. The clerk paled. "Hand the lady her paper," Barton said. "She is not." "Hand it back," Otto did. Violet took the letter, folded it, and tucked it into her bag. The room had changed around her, but not enough. The townspeople looked unsettled now instead of cruel. That was not the same as welcome. Mrs. Biddle cleared her throat. "She still has no room." Barton looked at Violet. "You got money." Violet could have lied. Pride wanted her to. Hunger would not let her. "Not enough for what she is asking." Mrs. Biddle folded her arms. "My rates are my rates." Barton placed his hat back on his head. "Then she will come to my ranch." The whispers began at once. Violet stiffened. Mr. Keller, I cannot simply. You said Sol needs watching. Sol works for me. My ranch is 12 miles out. You can ride in the wagon. I'll pay for your doctoring. Mrs. Biddle's eyes narrowed. A single woman at Keller Dry Creek Ranch. That will sound fine by Sunday. Barton's mouth hardened. Let it sound. Violet looked toward the street, toward the town that had already judged her, toward the stage road that led nowhere she could afford to go. Then she looked at the wounded man on the table, and at the rancher who had insulted her with one word and defended her with two. Move. Hand it back. It was not kindness exactly, but it was shelter. I will go until Sol is out of danger, Violet said. Barton nodded. That is all I asked. But as Violet gathered her bag, she felt the town watching, and she knew Mercy Flats would not let a humiliated woman leave its porch without carrying a scar behind her. Keller Dry Creek Ranch did not look like a place that could afford a doctor. It lay under the red shoulder of a mesa, with wind-bent cottonwoods marking the dry creek that gave the ranch its name. The house had once been whitewashed, but weather had stripped it to gray boards. A barn leaned west as if tired of standing. The corrals held more dust than cattle. Beyond them stretched acres of brittle grass, chewed low by hungry animals and burned pale by drought. Violet sat beside Sol in the wagon, one hand pressed to his wrist, counting his pulse as the wheels jolted over ruts. Barton rode alongside without speaking. He had given her a canteen and half a biscuit before they left town. He did not make a show of it. He simply handed them over, as if feeding her were part hitching the team. She ate the biscuit too quickly and was ashamed of that. At the ranch, a boy of 8 or 9 ran from the porch. He had a thin face, serious eyes, and one sleeve hanging empty at the cuff, until Violet realized his arm was not missing, only tucked close against his chest in a sling. Uncle Barton, he called. "I so dead? Not if Miss Quill keeps him from it," Barton said, climbing down. "Dr. Quill," Violet corrected softly. Barton paused. "Dr. Quill." The boy looked at her with open curiosity, not judgment. "I'm Eli. Violet Quill. Air lady doctors real. When they are tired, hungry, and dusty, yes, very real." That almost made him smile. They carried Sol into a small room off the kitchen. Violet cleaned it herself before letting him rest there. The sheets had been washed thin, but were clean. The basin was chipped, the window stuck. Barton stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his own house. "Who keeps home here?" Violet asked. "No one permanent. That explains the stove." His eyes flicked toward it. "Something wrong with my stove. It appears to have survived a war." "There was no war in that kitchen." "Then your coffee did it harm." Eli made a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. Barton gave the boy a look, but there was no bite in it. Violet saw then that the house was not neglected from laziness. It was a place where men had kept working outside until inside no longer mattered. Dust lay in corners. A woman's blue shawl hung on a peg by the back door, faded but untouched. On the mantel sat a small pair of child's shoes, carefully placed, never moved. Violet looked away before Barton caught her seeing them. That evening, she made broth from a bony chicken and herbs she found in her bag. She checked Sol's wound, cooled his forehead, and showed Eli how to wash his hands before touching bandages. The boy obeyed, solemnly. "What happened to your arm?" she asked. "Fell from the high loft?" "He jumped," Barton said from the doorway. Eli's ears reddened. "I was trying to see if I could land in the straw, and I could not." Violet examined the arm. The splint was rough, but serviceable. "It needs rewrapping." "Not tonight. You are tired." "And so am I." Barton set a plate on the table near her. Beans, cornbread, and a strip of salt pork. Violet stared at it longer than she meant to. "You paid me with supper already," she said. "I paid you with a biscuit." "That was poor wages." She sat. Her hands trembled as she picked up the fork. Barton saw, but this time he said nothing. After Eli went to bed and Sol slept under laudanum, Barton stood at the kitchen window, looking out into the dark. How much to stay until he is safe? He asked. $2 a day. I can pay one. I can accept one. If there is food, there is food. For me and any patient you expect me to treat, he turned. You bargain like a horse trader. My father, said a doctor, who cannot price her labor, will spend her life being tanked instead of paid. Smart man, he was. The past tense sat between them. Barton's face changed slightly, but he did not ask. Violet appreciated that more than comfort. He took a tin from the shelf and counted coins into his palm. She noticed how few remained inside. He noticed her noticing. This ranch looks larger from the road, she said. It used to be larger in truth. What happened? Drought. What? Bad cattle prices. Bad luck. She waited. His jaw worked once, and my own bad judgment. That was all he offered. The next morning, Violet learned the shape of the ranch's sickness. Not just Sol with fever rising. Not just Eli, motherless and watchful. Not just the cattle bawling at empty troughs. The whole place seemed to be holding its breath. The main well had gone brackish. The creek had not run in 2 seasons. Barton had mortgaged a section of land to buy feed, then borrowed again to keep his hands through winter. Ezra Vale at the bank held the papers. A neighboring rancher named Silas Rook had begun grazing cattle suspiciously close to Kellerland. Every man in town knew Dry Creek Ranch was dying. Some were waiting for it to fall. Violet understood dying things. She had seen men, children, horses, hopes, and reputations all go weak by degrees. But she also knew that sometimes what looked dead was only starved. For 3 days, she slept in a chair beside Sol. She ate when Barton remembered to bring food, and when he forgot, Eli brought it instead. Burned toast, cold beans, once an apple with a wormy side carefully cut away. On the 4th day, Sol's fever broke. Barton stood beside the bed, looking down at the old foreman. His shoulders lowered as if someone had removed a sack of stones from them. He will need another week, Violet said. Might be 2 before he can sit a horse. I figured. You do not sound pleased. I am pleased he is alive, and troubled he cannot work. Barton looked at her sharply. She did not flinch. It is not cruelty to count the cost. It is only cruelty to count it louder than the man's life. He stared at her for a long moment. You speak plain. So do wounds. That evening, a rider came from town with a note. Barton opened it by the corral. Violet watched from the porch as his face hardened. Trouble? She asked when he came in. Bank wants payment in 30 days. How much? He folded the paper. Too much? You asked me to speak plain. Return the courtesy. $800 overdue. More after that. Violet nearly laughed from shock. $800 might as well have been $8,000 to a ranch, running on beans and stubbornness. Can you sell cattle? Not enough weight on them. I would be giving them away. Can you borrow? He looked toward town. From the man calling the note, she understood. Later, as she unpacked clean bandages from her trunk, her fingers brushed the false bottom her father had built years ago. She had never opened it. He had told her the week before he died. There might come a day when what I left you looks like paper, until the right man reads it. At the time, grief had swallowed the meaning. Now, in the dim room of a failing ranch, Violet pressed the hidden latch. The bottom lifted. Inside lay a packet wrapped in oilcloth, a small ledger and certificates stamped with seals she did not understand. The names on them were her father's, then hers. Quill Mining shares, Territorial Water Company bonds, a deeded interest in a freight rose spur near Agua Bend. Her breath caught. Violet did not know what they were worth. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. But before she could examine them, Barton knocked once and opened the door halfway. She closed the false bottom too quickly. His eyes narrowed. Did I startle you? Yes, that all? Violet placed a hand on the trunk. Yes, it was the first lie she told him, and though it was small and frightened, it would grow teeth before either of them was ready. The days at Dry Creek Ranch began before sunrise, when the desert air was still cool enough to forgive the living. Violet rose with the first gray light and pumped water into a basin behind the house. She washed her face, braided her hair tight, and checked Sol before the rooster made a sound. His wound slowly improved, though he complained enough to convince everyone he would live. "You stitch like a seamstress and boss like a sheriff," he told her one morning. "Then heal like a respectable patient, and I will stop bossing. Never met a respectable patient, nor have I." Bart heard that from the kitchen and almost smiled, almost became a familiar thing with him, almost speaking kindly, almost asking what burden had put shadows under Violet's eyes. He lived as if every feeling had to be saddled, bridled, and tied to a post before it bolted. Violet learned his habits. He drank coffee strong enough to float horseshoes. He rode the east fence when worried. He checked the empty creek bed every evening, though he knew water would not be there. He spoke gently to horses and harshly to himself. He loved Eli fiercely but awkwardly, as if tenderness were a language he understood only in writing. Eli, for his part, followed Violet whenever chores allowed. She rewrapped his arm, made him exercise his fingers, and taught him to grind dried willow bark for pain. "Are you going to stay?" he asked one afternoon while they shelled beans on the porch. "Until Sol is well. That is not very long. No, Uncle Barton needs a doctor. I needs Rain more. He needs both." Violet glanced toward the corral, where Barton was trying to separate a gaunt cow from her calf. "Your uncle would not thank you for arranging his needs. He does not thank much anyway. That does not mean he feels nothing." Eli looked at her with a child's direct wisdom. "He feels too much. That is why he acts like nothing." Violet had no answer to that. Her work spread. A ranch hand came with a crushed tongue. A neighbor's daughter arrived with a cough. A Mexican vaquero from the South Range brought his wife, feverish after childbirth, and Violet rode out with Barton beside her through a night full of stars. She saved the woman with quinine, cool cloths, and stubborn prayer. On the ride back, dawn turned desert rose-colored. Barton slowed his horse beside hers. "You were not trembling tonight. I was needed. That stops it, sometimes. What starts it?" She looked across the open land. "Being watched by people who want me to fail." He absorbed that, without speaking. After a while, he said, "I was wrong to look at you that way in town." The apology was so rough, it seemed to scrape his throat. Violet kept her eyes forward. "Yes, you were." He gave a short nod. "I am sorry." She waited for him to excuse it. Men often apologized with one hand and took it back with the other. Barton did not. So she said, "Thank you." That morning changed something. Not much at once. Nothing dramatic. He still spoke little. She still kept her oilcloth packet hidden. But Barton began leaving coffee less boiled when she came into the kitchen. Violet began setting aside the softest biscuits for him without saying so. He made a shelf for her medicines in the spare room. She mended Eli's shirt. Barton rode into town and returned with thread, carbolic, and a second-hand medical text he pretended had come cheap. "It did not come cheap," Violet said, running her fingers over the worn cover. "Books are cheaper than ignorance." That sounds like something my father would say. Then he had sense. She looked up. He did. For the first time, she told Barton a little of Dr. Amos Krill, who had treated miners, widows, cholera patients, and outlaws with the same grave care. She told him how he believed a doctor's hand belonged to whoever suffered, not whoever could pay first. She did not tell him about the accident. She did not tell him about the hidden packet. But she gave him one true piece of herself, and he held it carefully. In return, Barton told her about his sister, Mai, who had died birthing Eli. He had taken the boy because there was no one else. His wife, Ruth, had been alive then. A year later, fever took Ruth and the baby daughter she carried. Barton buried both on a rise east of the house, where bluebonnets came in wet years. "There have not been wet years lately," he said. Violet understood he was not speaking only of rain. One afternoon, when the heat pressed low and the cattle stood with hanging heads, Violet found Barton at the dry creek, digging where the sand darkened under a line of cottonwoods. "What are you doing, looking for water with a shovel?" "I do not own a miracle." She stepped down into the creek bed and knelt. The earth beneath the surface held faint dampness. Not much, but enough to make her think. "My father used to say cottonwoods lie less than men," she said. "If the roots are alive, water still passes somewhere below." Barton wiped sweat from his brow. "Too deep for me. My bay not for a driven well." "With what money?" The question killed the small hope between them. Violet thought of the certificates in her trunk. She had ridden to town 2 days before under the excuse of buying lint and asked the old telegraph operator, Mr. Ives, about Quill Mining shares. He had squinted at the paper and said the company had been bought out after a silver strike. He did not know the value, but his eyebrows had risen high enough to frighten her. He had offered to send an inquiry to Denver. She had not told Barton. Now, watching him stand in the creek bed of his dying ranch, she almost did. But fear closed her mouth. Violet had seen what money did to people. Dr. Harrow had smiled warmly until he learned she had inherited more than books from her father. Then his kindness became courtship, then persuasion, then theft. When she refused marriage, he took her savings and left her with rumor. If Barton knew there might be wealth in her trunk, would he still see the doctor? Or would he see rescue for his ranch? She hated herself for wondering. "You should rest," she said instead. He leaned on the shovel. "That your medical opinion?" "Yes, my ranch is dying, Dr. Quill. So are you. If you keep working like punishment is fate." His eyes sharpened. She regretted the words at once, but they were true. Barton climbed from the creek bed. "You think you know me? I know men who make grief into labor, because labor does not ask to be held." He stepped close enough that she could see the pulse moving in his jaw. "Careful." "Why?" "Because truth might do what drought could not." For a moment, anger stood between them like a loaded gun. Then Eli shouted from the yard, "Uncle Barton, riders!" They turned. 3 men were coming down the road. At their head rose Silas Rook, owner of the neighboring bar R Spread, dressed too finely for the dust, with a black mustache and a smile that had never warmed anyone. Barton's face closed. "Stay behind me," he told Violet. She did not like being ordered, but when Silas Rook's eyes found her and lingered with recognition, he should not have had. Cold moved through her. "Miss Quill," Silas called, swinging down. "Or should I say, Doctor? Mercy Flats has been buzzing about you." Violet lifted her chin. "News travels cheaply here." Silas smiled. "So do reputations." Barton took 1 step forward. "Say your business." Silas looked over the ranch with theatrical sorrow. "Just came to remind you, the bank auction is in 30 days if payment fails. Hate to see Keller Land go under the hammer." "No, you do not." "No," Silas said softly. "I suppose I do not." Then his gaze slid back to Violet. "Strange thing," he said. "A woman like you, turning up on a ranch that needs money. Almost providence, or almost a plan." Violet's fingers tightened around her skirt. Barton saw, and Silas Rook saw Barton see. The game had begun. The next week brought heat like judgment. Sol sat up for the first time and cursed because Violet would not let him stand. Eli's arm healed well enough for him to help gather eggs from the stubborn hens behind the smokehouse. Barton sold 3 horses he loved and came home with feed, flour, and a silence so heavy even Eli did not try to break it. Violet's telegram answer arrived on a Wednesday. Mr. Ives sent a boy out from town with the folded paper. Violet read it behind the barn where no one could see her face. Quill Mining shares valid. Water company bonds valid. Estimated combined value exceeds $6,000 pending formal transfer. Denver office confirms heir Violet Quill. The desert seemed to tilt under her boots. $6,000. Enough to pay Barton's debt 6 times over. Enough to buy medicine, build a clinic, leave Mercy Flats forever. Leave without begging any boarding-house woman for a room. Enough to make every man who had laughed at her suddenly polite. Enough to make her afraid. She folded the telegram and tucked it into her bodice. When she turned, Barton stood near the corner of the barn. He had not been spying. She could tell by his face that he had come looking for a harness or a tool, and found her instead. But he had seen the paper. Bad news? He asked. No. Good news. She looked at him. This was the moment. It opened before her plain as the road to town. She could tell him. She could say, "My father left me wealth I did not understand. I might be able to help. I am frightened you will change when you know." Instead, she said, "Family business." His expression did not move, but something cooled in his eyes. "I see." The words hurt worse than accusation. That evening, he did not come in for supper until the food was cold. Violet sat with Eli and pretended not to notice. The next day, Mercy Flats received its own version of the news. No one knew how. Perhaps Mr. Ives had talked. Perhaps Silas had a man watching the telegraph office. Perhaps Ezra Vale had known more from the start than any of them guessed. By noon, Violet could feel the change when she rode into town for medicine. Mrs. Biddle called her Dr. Quill with sugar on her tongue. Otto Meeks hurried to open the bank door for her. Ezra Vale invited her into his office and offered tea. Violet remained standing. "I only came to ask whether Dr. Harrow left any forwarding address," she said. Vale smiled. "Dr. Harrow was not a man of firm roots. He stole from me. Many people claim theft when arrangements sour. I made no arrangement that included slander." Vale tapped his cane once against the floor. "My dear, Mercy Flats is a practical town. A woman alone must attach herself to reliable protection. Without it, stories grow. With it, stories settle. I did not ask for advice, but you might need it." He opened a drawer and drew out a paper. "Silas Rook has expressed interest in offering you security. Marriage, perhaps, a house in town, a place for your practice. He is a man of means." Violet stared at him. "Why would Mr. Rook discuss marriage with you before discussing it with me? Men of means discuss matters in the proper order. I am not a matter." Vale's smile thinned. Before he could answer, the bank door opened behind her. Barton Keller stepped in. He had dust on his shoulders and anger in his eyes. Dr. Quill came for medicine, not a husband. Vale folded the paper. Keller, always dramatic when money is involved. Barton ignored him and looked at Violet. "You ready to go?" She should have said she did not need rescuing. She should have been angry at his assumption, but the room felt like a trap, and his presence felt like a door. "Yes," she said. Outside, they walked to the wagon in silence. Only when town lay behind them did Barton speak. "Rook is after something. I know. I see after you." Violet watched the desert pass. "Perhaps. Is he after money?" Her chest tightened. Barton pulled the team to a stop. The wagon stood in the road with heat shimmering around them. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Ask what you mean," Violet said. "Do you have money?" There it was. She could hear no greed in his voice. That almost made it worse, because fear did not need proof to live. "I might have an inheritance." She sat carefully. "I only learned its value." "How much?" "That is private." He nodded slowly, as if she had stepped back from him in a room too narrow for distance. "Private? Sure. You are angry. I am trying not to be. Because I did not tell you? Because men are circling you like buzzers, and I do not know what wound they smell. That is not yours to know." His hands tightened on the reins. "You live under my roof. I, a doctor, caring for your foreman. And because I defended you when no one else would." The moment the words left him, regret crossed his face. Violet went still. He shut his eyes briefly. "That was poorly said. It was honestly said. No, it was mean. There is a difference." But the damage had been done. Violet heard Harrow in the echo. "I helped you. You owe me. I praised your work. You owe me. I offered marriage. You owe me. I will leave when Saul can travel, she said. Barton looked at her then, and the anger was gone. What remained was fear, raw, unfamiliar, and quickly hidden. Where will you go? That is private too. He flinched as if she had struck him. Then he clicked the reins. They rode home in silence. The rupture might have ended there, with pride on both sides and tenderness buried before it could bloom, if not for Eli. 2 nights later, the boy woke burning with fever. Violet found him curled in his bed, shaking, his healed arm clutched to his chest. Barton stood beside him, pale beneath the tan. It came fast, he said. He was fine at supper. Violet pressed a hand to Eli's forehead. Too hot. His pulse raced. His throat was swollen. She smelled the sour danger of infection. I need lamplight, cool water, my blue bottle. Now, Barton, move. For 12 hours, they fought the fever together. Violet measured medicine drop by drop. Barton held Eli when chills shook him. He did not ask whether her hands trembled. They did not. He did not question an order. He obeyed every one. Near dawn, Eli began to struggle for breath. Violet cut a reed, cleaned it, and performed the small, terrifying procedure her father had taught her for a throat closing from swelling. Barton watched his nephew's face turn gray, watched Violet's steady hands make a path for air, and for the first time since she had known him, he broke. Please, he whispered, not to her, not to anyone visible, not him too. Violet worked. Eli drew a thin, whistling breath. Then another. Barton sank into the chair as if his bones had dissolved. When the danger passed, Violet stepped onto the porch, covered in sweat and shaking so violently she could barely hold the rail. Barton came out after her. I thought God was taking him, he said. He is still here. Barton looked at her hands. You tremble after. Yes, not during. No, I never understood that. Most people do not stay long enough to learn. He stood beside her in the pale dawn. The desert was quiet. In the east, the sky had begun to turn silver. I am sorry, he said, for saying you lived under my roof like it made you beholden. Violet closed her eyes. He continued, voice low. When Ruth died, folks brought food, words, advice. Then they left. I decided needing anyone was just a slower way of losing them. I have been hard ever since. Eli pays for it. My men pay for it. You paid for it. She turned toward him. He looked older than he had the day before. More honest, too. I am not asking about your inheritance, he said. Not anymore. But Rook and Vale are. If you need a name beside yours to quiet the town, I will give it. Marriage in paper only, if that protects you. Your money stays yours. Your work stays yours. I will sign whatever says so. Violet's heart twisted. There it was. The marriage offer that mattered. Not romance spoken under stars. Not possession, a shield. But shields could become cages. Barton, she said gently, I will not marry to make gossip behave. His face closed a little, though he nodded. I figured, and I will not marry a man who offers himself like a fence post. That startled him. She held his gaze. You are worth more than protection, even if you have forgotten for a moment. He looked as if no one had told him that in years. Then the kitchen door creaked. Saul stood there, pale but upright, holding the doorframe. Hate to spoil whatever sermon this is, he rasped, but there are riders coming fast, and one of them looks like trouble wearing a city coat. The rider in the city coat was Dr. Linus Harrow. Violet knew him before his horse reached the yard. The neat beard, the gray suit too fine for ranch dust, the polished boots, the easy posture of a man who had lived by taking trust from people and calling it charm. Beside him rose Silas Rook and 2 of Rook's men. Barton stepped off the porch with his rifle in one hand, not raised, but not hidden. Harrow smiled when he saw Violet. There you are, my dear. You have caused a great deal of worry. Violet felt the old tremor seize her fingers. She folded them into her skirt. I am not your dear. Silas looked amused. Dr. Harrow says otherwise. Harrow removed a paper from his coat. I have a signed agreement. Miss Quill pledged to work under my supervision and repay debts advanced for her education and travel. She left without settlement, carrying medical property and financial documents that do not belong solely to her. That is a lie, Violet said. Her voice sounded thin to her own ears. Harrow's smile softened in the way that had once made Patience trust him. Violet has been unwell since her father's death. Nervous spells, trembling, confusion. I had hoped to spare her public embarrassment. Barton's rifle came up an inch. Violet touched his arm. No. Harrow saw the gesture and understood too much. Mr. Keller, I sympathize. She is gifted in certain narrow circumstances, but she is suggestible. If she has involved herself in your failing ranch, I advise caution. Silas swung down. This can be settled civilized. Miss Quill marries a stable man. Her assets are managed proper, and no one drags her name through court. I am willing to be generous. Barton's voice was deadly quiet. You are willing to be shot if you take another step. Silas stopped. Violet looked from one man to the other. All the fear of the past months rose in her. Harrow praising her hands while stealing her money. Harrow calling her fragile when she contradicted him. Harrow writing lies ahead of her so every door closed before she knocked. She had run from him, but running had only brought him here. And now Barton's ranch, Ellis' home, Saul's life. Everything was caught in the net because she had hidden a truth. She stepped forward. No, Barton said. She did not stop. My father left those documents to me, she said. Not to Dr. Harrow, not to any husband, not to any banker. To me, Harrow sighed. You see the agitation. Violet's hands shook harder. She lifted them where all could see. Yes, I tremble. I tremble when men lie with smiles. I tremble when I am hungry. I tremble when a town laughs before it listens. But I did not tremble when Saul was bleeding. I did not tremble when Eli could not breathe. I did not tremble when your patient, Mrs. Alvarez, nearly died in childbirth because you were too drunk to ride out in rain. Harrow's face changed. Barton looked at her with fierce attention. Violet reached into her pocket and drew out the telegram. I sent inquiry to Denver. The inheritance is mine. Silas' smile disappeared. And I am using part of it today, Violet said. Barton turned. Violet. She looked at him. No, listen. You told me once your ranch was die. I have watched it fight to live. I have watched Eli carry water in a pail too heavy for him because this place is the only home he knows. I have watched you sell horses you love because pride would not let you beg. I am not giving money to a man. I am buying back a piece of life from men who profit by starving it. She faced Silas and Harrow. Tell Ezra Vale I will meet him at the bank by noon. I will purchase the Keller note in full. The yard went silent. Barton looked stricken, not relieved. You cannot. I can. I will not take your fortune. You are not taking it. I am choosing. His voice roughened. And what remains for you? My skill, my name. Enough to build again. Harrow laughed once, sharp. You foolish girl. You think Keller will love you for it. Men love rescue until the debt sits at breakfast. Barton moved then. He crossed the yard, stopped in front of Harrow, and did not raise his rifle. He only stood close enough that Harrow's horse sidestepped. You do not speak of love in my yard, Barton said. Not with theft on your hands. Harrow's face paled. Careful, Keller. No, I have been careful too long. Careful with grief. Careful with pride. Careful not to need. It made me a poor guardian, a poorer neighbor, and a man half alive. But I will not be careful while you dress cruelty as concern. Silas rested a hand near his pistol. This is not your fight. Barton looked at him. It became my fight the day your men cut my north fence and turned cattle off my water lease. Silas went still. So, from the porch, rasped, I saw tracks, bar our shoes. Violet turned. Water lease. Barton did not take his eyes off Silas. There is an old spring canyon north of here. My father's lease went dry, or so I thought. Fences cut, trough smashed. I figured drought took it. Silas smiled thinly. Prove otherwise. Violet suddenly remembered the certificates in her packet. Territorial Water Company bonds. A deeded interest in a freight road spur near Agua Bend. Her father had treated surveymen in that district. He had taken payment in paper others thought worthless. What canyon? She asked. Quailbone Draw, Barton said. The name struck her. She opened her bag with shaking hands and pulled out the ledger. Pages fluttered until she found it in her father's handwriting. Quailbone Draw spring rights tied to Territorial Water Company survey. Secondary claim held by Amos Grill. Transferable to Violet Grill. She looked up slowly. Silas saw the truth on her face and reached for his gun. Barton was faster. He fired it into the dirt at Silas' horse's front hooves. The animal reared, and Silas fell hard into the dust. Rook's men reached for weapons, but Sol had a shotgun from the porch, and 2 ranch hands came around the barn with rifles raised. Harrow turned his horse as if to flee. Violet stepped into his path. For 1 wild second, she looked too small to stop anyone. Then she lifted her father's ledger. You will ride to town, she said, voice shaking but clear. You will stand before the sheriff, the judge, and every person you lie to. You will answer for theft, slander, and fraud. Or I will send copies to Denver, Santa Fe, and every medical board that ever printed your name. Harrow stared at her, and at last the mask slipped. Hatred showed underneath. You should have married me when I offered, he said. No, Violet replied. I should have stopped apologizing sooner. By noon, half of Mercy Flats had gathered outside the bank. Violet rode in beside Barton, with Sol in the wagon despite her objections, Eli sitting proudly beside him, and Harrow and Silas under guard behind them. The sheriff, who had ignored rumors when they were only about a woman, became very interested when water rights, forged debt papers, and cut fences entered the tale. Ezra Vale tried to refuse Violet's payment for the Keller note. She placed the bank draft on his desk. You called this town practical. Be practical. His face tightened. There are procedures and witnesses, Barton said from behind her. Men filled the bank doorway. Women peered through the windows. Mrs. Biddle stood across the street, pale and fascinated. The judge examined Violet's documents. Mr. Ives confirmed the Denver telegram. Sol swore to the cut fences. A bar our hand, frightened by the sheriff's attention, admitted Silas had ordered them to block the spring and spread word that Keller land had no water left. Harrow denied everything until Otto Meeks, trembling worse than Violet ever had, confessed that Vale had paid him to keep Harrow's first letter from being posted publicly and to help brand Violet a fraud. Harrow had promised a share if he could force Violet into marriage and control of her inheritance. By sundown, the town's judgment had turned like a weather vane, but Violet did not mistake that for justice. Public opinion was a cowardly horse. It ran wherever the loudest rider pointed it. When the papers were signed, the Keller note belonged to her. Barton stood outside the bank, looking more troubled than safe. You should be glad, she said softly. I am grateful. That is not the same. No, the street buzzed around them. People who had mocked her now tried to catch her eye. Mrs. Biddle even stepped forward and said, Dr. Quill, perhaps we began poorly. Violet looked at her. No, Mrs. Biddle, you began honestly. Poorly came after. The woman flushed and retreated. Barton's mouth twitched. Violet looked at him. Was that almost a smile? Would be rude, considering the occasion. What occasion? The day you bought my ruin and made me feel like the smallest man in town. Her heart sank. Barton, he shook his head. Not because you gave, because I do not know how to receive without feeling chained. You are not chained. You are not chained. I know that here. He tapped his temple. The rest of me is slower. She stepped closer, though the town watched. Then, let me make it plain. I did not buy you. I bought a debt from a banker. If that debt makes you feel owned, pay it back over time. In cattle, labor, land, whatever lets you stand straight. But do not punish me for having the means to help." He looked at her, and something in him yielded. Not completely, but enough. "What do you want?" he asked. "The spring restored. A clinic in Mercy Flats that treats those who can pay and those who cannot." Eli, educated, Soul kept from lifting anything heavier than a spoon for 1 month. Soul shouted from the wagon. I object. Noted and ignore," Violet called back. Barton's eyes stayed on her. "And for yourself?" The question pierced deeper than she expected. For herself, she wanted a room no one could deny her. Work no man could steal. A name no rumor could dirty. She wanted mornings at Dry Creek. Eli's questions, Barton's almost smile. The smell of coffee made less terrible because someone remembered she drank it too. She wanted what frightened her most, but she was not ready to say home. "Dignity," she said. Barton nodded. "That I can help build." Restoring quail bone draw took 2 weeks of sweat, dynamite, shovels, legal papers, and public shame placed where it belonged. Silas Rook's men had blocked the spring with stone and brush, then diverted what little water remained toward Bar Artros, hidden in a side wash. Once the obstruction broke, water did not burst forth like a miracle in a preacher's story. It seeped first, muddy and uncertain. Then it gathered into a thin, shining runnel. Then, by the 3rd day, it sang over rock. Barton stood ankle-deep in that water, with his hat in his hand. Eli splashed despite being told not to. So sat on a crate and gave orders nobody needed. Violet knelt by the stream and let the water run over her fingers. They trembled slightly from exhaustion, but the trembling no longer felt like shame. It felt like proof she had survived enough for her body to remember. Barton came to stand beside her. "Looks like the ranch my life," he said. "It was never as dead as people say." "No." He looked at her. "I reckon neither were you." The words were simple. That made them stronger. The town changed slowly after that. Not because hearts are easily remade, but because usefulness has a way of forcing respect where kindness fails. Violet opened a temporary clinic in the old church schoolroom. The first week, few came. The second week, a miner arrived with a burned arm. Then a baby with colic. Then Mrs. Biddle with headaches she insisted were not caused by guilt. Violet treated her anyway. She charged what people could pay and wrote down what they could not. Barton came each Saturday with lumber, nails, or some other offering he claimed was practical. He repaired the clinic steps. He built shelves. He hauled water. He never hovered over her money, never asked what remained of her inheritance, never spoke as if saving his ranch had made her responsible for his pride. But he did begin paying the debt. At first, she found coins in a jar on her clinic desk, then sacks of flour, then a heifer with a ribbon around its neck, left in the pen behind the schoolroom. Violet rode out to Dry Creek that evening. Barton was mending harness by the barn. "There is a cow behind my clinic," she said. "Heifer. That distinction does not explain why she is there. Payment. For what? The note? Barton, a cow cannot fit in a bank ledger. She can if you write small." She tried not to smile and failed. He saw it. This time, he smiled fully. It changed his face so much Violet had to look away. The affection between them grew in plain sight, though neither named it quickly. It lived in Barton walking her horse to the mounting block without making her feel weak. It lived in Violet, leaving a packet of headache powder by his coffee when he had ridden too long in the sun. It lived in Eli asking whether Dr. Quill might come for supper and Barton pretending to consider before saying, "Yes, she has no better offer." One Sunday, after service, Ezra Vale attempted to step back into respectability. He wore a dark suit and stood near the church steps, greeting people with solemn humility. The sheriff had not yet built a case strong enough to jail him, but the town knew. That was its own sentence. When Violet came out, Vale removed his hat. "Dr. Quill, I hope we might move forward without bitterness." Violet stopped. Barton stood a few feet away, watching but not speaking for her. "You helped a man call me unstable so he could steal what my father left me," Violet said. "You tried to trade me into marriage like collateral." Several people turned. Vale's face tightened. "This is hardly the place. This is exactly the place. You shamed me publicly. You might hear the truth publicly." His eyes flicked to Barton. "Keller, control." Barton stepped forward. "Finish that sentence and lose teeth." A hush fell. Violet looked at Barton. He looked back, and she understood he was not taking her voice. He was guarding the space around it. She faced Vale again. "I will not carry bitterness, Mr. Vale. It is too heavy, but I will carry memory. And so will this town." Vale left without another word. Afterward, Barton walked Violet to her horse. "You did not need me," he said. "No, but you did not mind me standing there." She looked at him. "No." He rested a hand on the saddle horn. "I have been thinking about that offer I made. The paper marriage." His ears reddened slightly beneath his hat. "Yes, I made it sound like a fence and a roof." "You did." I was scared. That honesty stilled her. He looked toward the road, then back at her. "I was scared because wanting you to stay felt like standing in a burning house and calling it warmth. I have lost enough that wanting anything seemed foolish. Then you came along with shaking hands and more courage than any steady-handed man I know, and you made my house feel inhabited again." Violet could hear her own heartbeat. Barton continued, "I am not asking because of gossip, not because of the ranch, not because of money. I am asking because I love you, Violet Quill. I love your sharp tongue, your mercy, your stubborn way of looking at a dying thing and seeing instructions instead of surrender. If you never marry me, I will still pay what I owe, still bring lumber, still stand where you need standing. But if you can see a life with me, I would count it the highest mercy I ever received." Violet's eyes blurred. For years men had wanted her useful, grateful, quiet, manageable, rich, poor, dependent, impressive, or small. Barton was the first to stand before her and ask without reaching. "My hands tremble," she whispered. "I know, I argue, I have survived. I will not give up doctoring. I would not ask you to. The clinic stays mine." "Yes, and Dry Creek stays yours?" He shook his head. "No." Her breath caught. He reached into his coat and took out a folded paper. "I had the judge draw this. Half interest in Dry Creek Ranch transferred to Violet Quill, not as payment, not as purchase, not as bargain, because you saved it, and because if we build anything, I want it built honest." She stared at the paper, then at him. "Barton Keller, that is either the most romantic or the most impractical thing I have ever seen." Likely both. A laugh broke through her tears. He stepped closer. Yes. Violet looked past him toward the desert road, toward the clinic, toward the ranch that had almost died, toward the town that had tried to make shame her name. She thought of her father's hands guiding hers over a wound. She thought of Barton at Eli's bedside, whispering please. She thought of water returning one thin silver thread. Yes, she said, "but not because you saved me, no, because you learned. I did not need saving before you asked to walk beside me." They married 3 weeks later under the cottonwoods at Quail Bone Draw. It was not a grand wedding. Violet wore a cream dress, Mrs. Alvarez, and her sisters altered by lamplight. Barton wore his best black coat, brushed until the seams shone. Eli carried the rings in a little medicine tin because he said that was fitting. Soul cried and denied it. Half the town came, some from affection, some from curiosity, some because Mercy Flats had discovered it, preferred redemption when it could witness it. Mrs. Biddle brought a cake and apologized without decoration. Violet accepted both. After the vows, Barton kissed her gently. As if asking even then, she answered by placing her trembling hands on his face before everyone, letting them see the tremor, letting them see he did not flinch. Months passed and Dry Creek Ranch became a place of motion again. The spring-fed troughs, new calves stood on uncertain legs. The barn was repaired plank by plank. Violet's clinic grew from 1 room to 3, with a sign painted by Eli in careful letters. Dr. Violet Quill Keller, physician. She kept Quill because Barton said a name that had carried her through fire. Deserves sunlight. She rode between town and ranch with a medical bag strapped to her saddle. Sometimes Barton rode with her. Sometimes he stayed to mend fence or teach Eli figures at the kitchen table. The house changed too. The blue shawl by the door was folded and placed in a cedar chest, not forgotten, but no longer standing guard over grief. The little shoes on the mantel remained, with fresh wildflowers beside them in wet months. One evening near sundown, Violet returned from delivering a baby at the Alvarez place. She was exhausted, dusty, and hungry. Her hands trembled around the reins. Barton met her at the yard with a lantern. "How is the child?" he asked. Loud, "Good sign. His mother is well. Better sign." He lifted her down, not because she could not manage, but because love sometimes meant letting another person take a portion of your weight. From the porch, Eli waved a school slate. "Li wrote the accounts," he shouted. "We owe Dr. Quill Keller 3 chickens and a jar of peaches." Violet looked at Barton. "Your debt system remains unusual. IT has improved. No heifers this week." They walked together toward the house. Beyond the barn, cattle moved like dark shapes against the gold light. The creek, once dry as bone, caught the sunset and turned bright as a hidden coin. Wind stirred the cottonwoods. Somewhere, Sol sang badly while mending a bridle. At the porch steps, Violet stopped and looked back at the land. Barton stood beside her. "What is it?" She held up her hands. They trembled softly in the evening air. Once, everyone in Mercy Flats saw these hands and thought they meant I was broken. Barton took them in his, warm and calloused. They were wrong. Violet looked at the shining creek, the living ranch, the man who had learned tenderness the hard way, and the home that had grown from public shame into dignity. "No," she said softly. They were early. The desert wind moved around them, carrying the smell of dust, water, cattle, and supper smoke. And there, on the ranch she had saved with a hidden fortune and a courage even fear could not kill, Violet Quill Keller rested her trembling hands in Barton Keller's steady ones, while the dying land behind them lived,